Every once in a while, we cover a movie that has coffee in it, so I don't have to strain some kind of simile to link it to our sponsor. And even though Meryl Streep's character in Out of Africa went to Kenya with the intention of running a dairy farm, her husband crosses her up and makes it a coffee farm instead. And I'm sure what they grew was pretty good, even though tasty beans are supposedly very difficult to grow on the mountainous slopes of Kenya. But spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, Karen Blixen's farm fails. Well, if you make your residence in Canada or the not-so-United States, then you need not rely on a wing and a prayer operation like that. You can rely on Spark Plug Coffee. They sell their customers premium quality beans, which are the best with which you've ever brewed. Spark Plug will ship right to your door, and my fellow country folks in the Great White North do not have to dig in their pockets to pay for shipping. This stuff was already convenient and affordable. Now I go and throw free shipping at you. And you know what? You know what? Sparkplug thinks you should join the Autopilot Coffee Club. Once you find your new favorite, you can get that blend sent as often as you like. Pause or cancel anytime. Takeo Coffee has nothing on this stuff. Their website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Our HYES discount code can be used to snag a one-time 20% savings. Click over to the site and give it a try. Okay, you're set with your Java, and you don't have to hope the African lady can harvest it for you. Wait, she's not African, she's a visitor. Well, anyway, now let's get some jaunty tunes to play us into the episode about Meryl and Bob romancing all over that continent across the Atlantic. And action! Have you ever seen Out of Africa? What's going on, movie maniacs? Thank you for downloading or streaming the 654th edition of this spoiler-bathed classic movies podcast that we used to call the Top 100 Project. But ever since the beginning of 2023, we've been calling the extravaganzas that appear on this channel, Have You Ever Seen? I'm a guy who's never been anywhere near Africa, unless enjoying my honeymoon on the island of Ibiza counts as close to Africa. It's pronounced Ibiza, not Ibiza. And I'm Ryan Ellis. My wife Bev isn't on the other side of the table today because she's still getting over her foot surgery. But spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, she'll be back next week. More on that later. Because Bev isn't here right now, she can't do a 4-second celebration of the anniversary of our podcast with me, which we launched on March 25th, 2013. So when you hear from us next Monday, we will have begun our 13th year of doing this movie reviewing thing. So, of course, our anniversary is tomorrow. And if you scroll back to the very first few episodes, you'll see that it looks like we got going in August, not in March. But that's only when we got on iTunes. We were posting on top100project.com for several months first, so I count March, not August. Okay, then, pretty much entirely in Africa, came out in December 1985, which means this will be a 40-year-old motion picture this ho-ho season. Universal's prestige release did great with ticket buyers. It was 5th at the domestic box office that year, and was number 1 worldwide. And Universal had to be thrilled because Bob Zemeckis' wonderful tomfoolery known as Back to the Future was another big film that Universal released that year, and it was number 1 domestically. How about a skinny on the story of Out of Africa? Well, Sydney Pollack directs this motion picture based on Kurt Luedtke's screenplay, which is based on several books, and I'll shout out those writers later on. Meryl Streep plays Karen Blixen, a Danish woman who marries Klaus Maria Brandauer's Bror Blixen. Bror, B-R-O-R. He's a Swede, right? I wasn't totally clear on that. Anyway, they go to Kenya to start a farm where they'll grow coffee. It's not called Kenya at that point. It's East British Africa. Is that what it is? Their nationality doesn't really matter, I don't think, by the way. They're just white people in Africa. They could be Swedish, they could be Danish, they could be English, they could be Canadian, but they're white people in a foreign land. Anyway, this is a marriage of convenience, with her being the one with money and him being a Baron Bror Blixen, with influence. But they do fall for each other, only he'd rather take off in safari around the African wilderness than stay in the house with the wife. In the meantime, she falls hard for another great white hunter type, Dennis Finch Hatton, an Englishman played by the very American Robert Redford. Only he won't settle down and just live with her in that nice house either. But when they are together, the sparks, they fly. Or, in a nutshell, self-hating lions. And I say that because at the end, and here comes a big spoiler again, this is an actual spoiler, although I told you I'd spoil the movie, Karen's friend Farah writes to her to say that a pair of lions like to hang out on Dennis's grave all the time. So they must not like their own kind very much if they honor someone who killed other lions. Well, there are a pile of facts and figures to throw at you about this movie, Out of Africa does squeak out a fresh piece of fruit on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's only at 62% from the critics. 62 only. 55 of 89 reviews are good, and the average is 6.9 out of 10. Roger Ebert was one of the critics who loved it and gave it 4 stars, although he didn't find room for it on his top 10 list. It must have been 11th or 12th if he gave it 4 stars. The Rotten Tomatoes rating is one of the very worst marks ever for a Best Picture winner. Most of the others that do even worse are very old flicks, like The Broadway Melody and The Greatest Show on Earth. Even Green Book and Crash are in the 70s. I think they're 76, 72, that kind of thing. But on the bright side, and this tracks for a movie that was such a blockbuster, the popcorn meter has this at 82%, so of course that's the audience's. Sydney Pollack's ratings on that site are quite good beyond the mediocre scores for this film. He shared director credit with Frank Perry on The Swimmer, which was back in the 60s, the Burt Lancaster movie where he swims through people's pools in their backyards. That's a perfect 100%. Jeremiah Johnson with Redford and Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman both have pretty excellent 91% ratings. Meryl Streep has lots of great numbers on the Tomatoes as well. Defending Your Life, which was an Albert Brooks comedy, 1991 I think it was, is right near the very top for her. Robert Redford generally has great review numbers too, with the very best for him as an actor not actually being Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid or The Sting or one of his sports movies like The Natural. No, it's not. It's the one-man show he did on a boat, All Is Lost. That came out in 2013, and that was a strong year for acting, but he and Tom Hanks and Captain Phillips were both shut out of being nominated for an Oscar, even though they were both very worthy. And Hanks' movie is also mostly on a boat. Since I'm covering it in Oscar month, we know Out of Africa took home some Academy Awards, 7 in fact. Most significantly, it was given the trophy for Best Picture, which went to Sydney Pollack as the producer, and old Sid won for his direction too. Kurt Luedtke was the Academy's choice for Best Adapted Screenplay. David Watkin won for his cinematography. John Barry won for his music score. Plus Chris Jenkins, Gary Alexander, Larry Stensvold, and Peter Hanford were the sound team that had their names called. And Stephen Grimes and Grimy and Josie McCavan got the nod for designing the sets. I don't begrudge them being honored, but I think the African Wilderness did a lot of work for Watkin and the set designers. That's a lot of awards, but it was far from a clean sweep. Klaus Maria Brandauer lost out to Hume Cronin for Best Supporting Actor, who took it home for his work on Cocoon. The Out of Africa costumes were nominated unsuccessfully too, and so was the editing. And Geraldine Page won Best Actress for The Trip to Bountiful instead of Mary Louise Streep. No tears for our girl, though, because she already won 2 Oscars before this. Curiously, though, she went nearly 30 years between wins, from Sophie's Choice in 1982 to The Iron Lady in 2011. As for the Best Director competition, Steven Spielberg won the DGA for The Color Purple that year, but then he didn't even get nominated for the Best Director Oscar. So maybe that's why Sidney shook Steven's hand on his way up to the stage. Something like a, I respect your work and maybe you should at least have been in the competition with me type gesture. Steven was there, of course, for producing The Color Purple. Now, it's not like he, as a 3-time winner, has anything to complain about, but Steve's movies have been up for Best Picture in years in which he was passed over for a Best Director nomination many times, including Jaws, War Horse, Bridge of Spies, and a street movie, The Post, and of course, in this case, Color Purple. As is tradition, I watched all the acceptance speeches, except I couldn't find a clip of the Best Sound presentation. This was the year when they had Robin Williams, Jane Fonda, and Alan Alda co-hosting together. I like all of them, and they're remarkably talented people, but what a strange threesome to put together. Barbra Streisand presented the Best Director Oscar to her old friend Pollack, who directed her in The Way We Were, which was one of at least 3 times she was picked to present that trophy, because they called on her in 1992 when Clint Eastwood won his first trophy for Unforgiven, and the year Catherine Bigelow won. And you knew that was intentional. We all thought Bigelow was going to win. They wanted a woman to present to her, although Barbara herself has never even been nominated once for a Best Director Oscar. She's won 2 other ones. I think she's going to do okay, and has done okay. The one with the record number of times presenting the Best Director Oscar, though, has got to be Spielberg. He pulled out the card when it was Benton for Kramer vs. Kramer, Foreman for Amadeus, Zemeckis for Forrest Gump, Sam Mendes for American Beauty, Scorsese for The Departed, Nolan for Oppenheimer. That's 6 times, and I bet there's even more. He's done for Best Picture a few times, too. Slumdog Millionaire and Lord of the Rings are 2 examples of that. Anyway, after Streisand confused Pollack's fellow nominees, Akira Kurosawa and John Huston, when she sang Memories from The Way We Were for a few seconds, then she called out her old friend's name. Sid gave a very nice speech, highlighting all the key people, and ending it by gushing about how good Streep is. David Watkin didn't say all that much when he won for cinematography, but he was nice enough to give credit to the second unit director and the guy who did the animal photography, as he put it. Maybe that's happened before, but I don't remember too many winners mentioning those key people when they get a trophy for their camera work, so the second unit guy, or woman for that matter. Now, maybe it was because their Singin' in the Rain director, Stanley Donen, produced the Academy Awards that year, and he recruited them, But Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds, and Donald O'Connor presented the Oscar to John Barry. That was pretty cool, reteaming that delightful trio to give out the Best Music Score Oscar. Barry had been at the dance before, so he was polite and gracious, but didn't say very much. Kurt Luedke was gracious too when he won for his screenwriting, but I like how he ended his speech by saying, "Mrs. Gummer, thank you very much," because Meryl had been married to Don Gummer for going on 8 years at that point, although they've since split up. Wasn't that recently? Don Gummer is not a Hollywood person. He was never an actor or anything, but if you watch the Oscars when she got all those nominations over the years, and of course the wins, he was, I think, always right there beside her. Gummer probably went to more Oscar ceremonies than just about anybody, except for Streep herself, I guess. Best Picture was presented by 3 absolute legends, John Huston, Billy Wilder, and Akira Kurosawa. Huston and Kurosawa were there, of course, as nominees in the first place. I guess Wilder just said, "Oh, go and do it too." It's hard to believe Akira never won a competitive Oscar the way Billy and John did, and this was the only year he was even so much as nominated for one, which was for directing Ron. But at least they did give him an honorary award in 1990, 40 years after the brilliant Rashomon came out. Maybe that was the intention. And I think his films won at least once, and maybe more than that, for the what used to be called the Foreign Language Film Oscar. I don't know if he accepted that. I didn't look that up. But he himself only one actual competitive nomination. Pollack used up all his best thank yous when he won for directing, so he didn't say much when he accepted for Best Picture. It's a shame this guy only got 73 years on this planet. He died of stomach cancer nearly 18 years ago. Okay, that's enough Oscar talk for at least 2 or 3 minutes. I'll probably come back to it at some point. How about the AFI? Well, John Barry's tunes were 15th on the American Film Institute's Top 25 music scores, while the film was 13th on the Top 100 Passions, one spot ahead of The African Queen. Africa, Africa, Africa. Karen's recurring line where she says in voiceover, "I had a farm in Africa," was a nominee for the Top 100 quotes, and the film was also up for the 1998 and 2007 AFI Top 100 lists. All right, I spent a lot of time talking about the Oscars there and the AFI, but longtime listeners know how much that subject fascinates me, those 2 subjects, I guess. Plus it is Oscar month, but the plot of Out of Africa awaits. Let's break it down. We start 112 years ago in the year 1913, with Pollack showing us grand vistas of Africa. He'll do that a lot in this movie. And then an older Karen in bed, narrating the experience she had with Dennis, including saying that line about, "I had a farm in Africa." The makeup on her as an older person is pretty good. She's a Dane who just wants to get away to anywhere. Getting out, getting anywhere, getting all the way to Australia, wherever. It ends up being British East Africa, i.e. Kenya, but the conversation between Karen and Broer, so Streep and Brandauer, is done in front of a horrible blue screen, maybe green screen, but a horrible looking visual effect. They were clearly in a studio with the Danish countryside projected behind them. They shot most of this film on a game reserve in Kenya, but plenty of it was filmed in studios in England too. Case in point right here. And I don't think they ever went to Denmark at all. Liars! The 2 decide to get married in Africa, but it's a union of convenience, not love. They'll use her money to start up a dairy farm way down south, and he'll run it. She later calls him my love's brother, so she obviously would rather have married the brother instead, but he bailed on her. So we're on to Kenya, with Streep's voiceover saying over and over again, "I had a farm in Africa." Before I saw this movie again, I was all set to complain about such a mundane line as "I had a farm in Africa," even being a candidate for the quotes list. But in context, it's actually pretty powerful. It's a lament of what she lost when she was priced out of Kenya, and also a regret that the romances she had with 2 men she loved while on that farm didn't end happily ever after. So now I think it's a pretty important quote. Anyway, a train carries her and her Scottish deerhound as John Barry's big score gets to show off its grandeur. Bev did not watch this movie with me, and she wouldn't have loved that score, I'm sure, but she would have been happy about at least 2 things if she had seen it. One was getting to look at the deerhound, and the second would have been getting to look at Robert Redford. Okay, maybe reverse that in order of importance, or maybe not. She loves dogs, she loves Bobby Reds. And Redford gets quite an entrance, as he and one of his Kenyan buddies carry huge elephant tusks past her and toss them onto the train car in front of hers. This ivory is supposed to go to a man we'll soon meet, Barclay Cole, spelled Berkeley, pronounced Barclay. So Mr. Dennis Finch-Hatton here trusts this woman he's just met to take care of something as valuable as ivory. Of course, she said she's going to marry Broer, and Dennis knows him. Plus, maybe the logic is, she's a woman, she's trustworthy. And, of course, they can't have too long a conversation. The movie's long as it is. Their romance will heat up later. First, she has to marry Broer and become a baroness. It's a quick ceremony outdoors, no pomp at all. But marriage and convenience or not, their kiss after they say I do is fairly sexy, and not just a our business transaction is official type thing. She meets Michael Goff at this point, who plays Delamere, or D, and Michael Kitchen, who plays Barkley, the man who was supposed to be getting those tusks from his buddy Dennis. Bror introduces Care to the local Kenyans. Then she finds out over dinner that Bror is going back on their deal to do a cow thing. He's going to grow coffee on the side of the mountain instead. And you can bet it isn't spark-plug coffee. They didn't exist back 100 plus years ago, or even in 1985 when the movie was made. She's not happy about that and retaliates by taunting him about how she slept with his brother before she left to come here. Now, the real farm was something like 4,000 acres, and they had hundreds of Kikiyu workers. Did I say that right, Kikiyu? But they're going to plant 500 acres worth of coffee beans. Although the guys who know about these things say it'll take years for a good crop to be ready to harvest, if even then. I guess trying to make brew beans happen at that altitude is just a bad idea. This is not an action movie or anything, obviously, but there are some moments of tension, and here's one, where a lioness stalks a petrified Karen while she's out walking on her own, only to be saved by Dennis. Although he doesn't actually do what she wants and shoot the lion dead, he just trains his shotgun on it and keeps his finger off the trigger because the furry lady doesn't attack the human lady. The cat just walks away. And why kill a lion who just showed some teeth and then strolled off? The two main stars of this film have dinner with Barkley, while Bror's off on safari or something, where the den man is clearly starting to fall for her. Redford does some good face acting here to sell how enraptured he is with her while she tells a story. The scene works pretty well. It's helped by John Barry's music, of course. Karen will be into him right back, but not yet. But she is married, and whether this is an arrangement or not, there's a brief post-coital scene where Bror and Karen cuddle in bed. She actually seems to be really in love with the guy, and we also know she's going to fall for the hunky blonde guy later on. It's on the poster, after all, hence 13th on the AFI's Top 100 Passions list. And while the next part isn't about sexy times, Karen also starts to make friends with the Kikiyu in Kenya, including a kid with an infected leg. She's surprised how much she's come to care for Bror, even though he keeps leaving her to go off on safari. So she's got no man at all because Dennis left to do his own thing too, without even saying goodbye, and that's his MO in this movie. But she does get to make friends with a fellow white lady, an English woman named Felicity, played by Susanna Hamilton. She has a few scenes in the film. This is probably the biggest one, I think, maybe the longest. Who comes by for tea and a chat. Felicity wants to be taught in the ways of men and romance. And when Our Lady says, "I suppose you have to call me Karen," I guess that's her way of saying she's in. We needed some more danger, so here we have the British military insisting that the women and children have to go into town because, without the men around, they're worried about the natives getting aggressive. But she doesn't care for their rules, so she's not going anywhere. She came to Africa for a reason, after all, not to just be stuck in a city. She's a country girl at heart. World War I is heating up, and the men need supplies far from where she is on the farm, so Karen sets out with Farah and some others to find Delamere and his militia. But Barkley and Dennis track her down. Bark says she has to stop this search, for her own safety, I guess, but she won't listen. At least Dennis is helpful, giving her a compass and telling her that Dee and those guys are about a 3-day ride away. Just follow the compass. One night while Karen and her posse are asleep by the campfire, a couple of lions stroll into the camp and go after the oxen. If the oxen die, then the humans would be stranded and they'd be dead too, so they go after those angry cats. The oxen do fight back too, using their horns as spears. I don't know how they shot this without the animals getting hurt or even killed, and maybe some of them did. After all, I just looked at the closing credits on YouTube to confirm this, and I didn't see the part where it says no animals were harmed while making this motion picture. So maybe there was a whole lot of harming going on. But Karen and the Kikiyu try their best to shoo the lions away, even though the female has crippled one of the oxen and is trying to feast. The K-woman has the courage to try to whip that hungry cat away, and she gets all cut up during this very scary incident, which can only serve to impress the natives. She proves she's got a lot of verve. Streep, by the way, was told that the lion she faces down would be tied by its back legs out of camera range, but somehow it wasn't, so she didn't have to do much acting. She was actually legit terrified. How does that happen, stunt team? It's a lion! That scene should have been planned so thoroughly that even Streep was getting sick of waiting and said, "Let's just shoot this thing." Instead, it's the opposite. Maybe she could have died right then and there. A tousled, dirty, and yet also sexier Karen does find Delamere and Bror. Looking like she does right now, it's easy to forget that she was just a frightened woman who did not belong here only a few scenes ago. Also, Pollack didn't think she could be sexy enough for this role. Apparently she proved it in the, not audition, but meeting they had, and she really proves it right now. That night she asked her husband straight out if he's ever going to stay home and be a farmer, but he's honest enough to say no. He just wants to hunt. She could cut him off, since she's the one with money, but she's too smitten with the guy to actually do that. Just honor as well. I think that's part of this whole thing. He's my husband. I can't do that. It isn't the typical, he's a mean, maybe even violent prick to her. He just wants to do his own thing. And I assume he wants her to be there for him when he wants her to be. which is what Redford's character does too. It's a bit of a sexist movie, I guess. But we're talking about a movie made 40 years ago, set 100 plus years ago. We'll move on. They do some more consummating, which must be how she got syphilis. All that messing around and he caught an STD, didn't show any symptoms himself, and yet it's killing her. Her chances of survival are about 50-50, even with treatment back in Denmark. Although at least Bror admits it's his fault she's in this kind of way. He doesn't just pin it on someone else or worse, accuse her of stepping out on him. She will, but he brought it on himself. Karen leaves Bror to manage the farm while she goes home to Denmark to get treatment, narrating how much she misses Africa as Pollack shows us a montage of those she left behind doing their Serengeti type thing. It is just the Serengeti, right? I love that word, so I hope it's accurate to call this the Serengeti. Maybe it's not. I don't know. There's only so much research I can do. I spent all my time on the Oscars with this. Well, I spent some time looking up Africa facts, too. The meds work, so she comes back to Kenya and looks pretty good again. A side effect, though, is that she can't have children, although I read in reality that Karen Blixen had a miscarriage of Dennis's baby at one point. They never portray that at all in the film. Enough time has passed that Africa is now lousy with cars, not just trains and pack animals to get around on. She's welcomed back by the Kikiyu, including the now healed kid who had that bad infection on his leg when she first met him. Bror tells her he plans to go back out hunting now that she's there to split her time being the school teacher and farmer. He tells her that the coffee might even start flowering soon. And Pollack does a clever thing here. Streep's face indicates that she doesn't have the same kind of passion she had for her husband before. The camera tilts down to show the compass Redford gave her on the vanity because she's thinking about him. Very good direction there. And Dennis is very drunk at a Christmas party when she runs into him, learning that one of their friends is dead while Barkley is sick. But he'll get better. This time. Their goodnight implies that the romance we know is coming between these two isn't too far in our future. This movie is nothing if not deliberate and patient, though. Barkley does recover from being sick in time to dance with his friend Karen at a New Year's gathering. Bror is there too, and he's with another woman. A stupid fight between the Barkman and some doofus has Dennis pulling Karen out of the middle of it, and they dance. They also kiss each other at midnight, although not all that passionately. Not yet. While coffee was not looking like a good idea, the gambit pays off because there are flowers and beans everywhere. Karen pitches in to help them harvest and bag the beans, shoveling and sifting right alongside the Kikiyu. And then, he was there. Dennis shows up looking dashing, of course, and telling her that he's heading out on safari. Oh, and she probably needs to leave this part of the country for her own safety. I'm guessing he means because of white invaders, not because of lions and Kenyans and bears. Oh my. Pollack takes the time to show off more of the countryside and all its marvelous animals, as Dennis drives Karen deep into the middle of nowhere. He tries to shoo the animals away that have surrounded them when their car breaks down, calling back to when she tried to shoo that lion away, or was it when Dennis first met him? She said shoo? Anyway, whichever, it bonds them even more, if he bothered to remember something as unimportant as that, saying shoo. And they bond some more and more and more as the days and nights pass. It's an interesting way to show intimacy when Pollack has him shampooing her hair. The conversation is very personal when she confesses that she had syphilis, and now she can't have kids, that all she needs now is the farm. But we were due for some action again, so they go hunting and stumble across some lions feasting on a kill. Pollack uses slow-mo to show them attacking the humans, with Karen shooting the racing lioness, and Dennis taking down the dude lion. The dude. What a team of cat killers. And I guess the menu for tonight just changed. They didn't forget to bring the record player to be able to dance to some classical music. Mozart, I think, right? Nor did they forget to bring silverware, wine, and the appropriate glasses. Roughing it, baby. We call that what now, glamping? They finally have a sexy kiss, not just a simple lip lock like at New Year's. Although we don't see them getting to bumping. Come on, Sydney. Who doesn't want to see these two do more than just kiss? Well, we'll get to that later. The good times end when he brings her home and she gets reacquainted with her buddy Barkley, who's gotten sick again. This time he's doing much worse, dying of blackwater fever. Well, he's in the middle of dying. He hasn't died yet. We find out a few scenes from now that he's also in love with a beautiful Somalian servant, I guess. Maybe Dennis realizes that since his friend is dying, he needs to make some kind of commitment to Karen. Bit of a hint, right? Somebody dies of cancer or something, and I'm going to make a new commitment to the person I love. Her philandering husband wants to marry someone else anyway. So in the very next scene, Dennis drives up, walks right over, and kisses her with the lust we didn't really get before. Then they head straight for the boudoir. We don't get any naughty skin, not that I expected much of it considering those are two movie stars in this scene, but they do sell how hot they are for each other. Dennis suggests that he move into her place, even though he's not sure if he'll be good at playing house. As a separate issue, they seem shocked that their buddy Barkley was in love with a Somali woman and never told them. Are they saying that she made him sick? Or is this racism because she's black and they're white? Might very well be that. But racial politics don't matter that much once Barclay dies, and it's telling that his lover, Mariamo, I think that's her name, isn't allowed to mourn with all the white people at the funeral, even though she was closer to him than anybody. She seems pretty angry about it, too, looking at Karen with a hard stone face. It wasn't until I saw the end credit that I confirmed what I suspected was true, which is that Mariamo is played by Iman. I thought she looked familiar. Of course, she's in Star Trek VI, briefly in the middle of the movie. For his part, Dennis isn't even there. I guess we can go off and grieve for his friend in his own way. Or he just hates formal gatherings. Meanwhile, we get another montage of Karen and Dennis just being in love and her working the farm, also taking care of the Kenyans with medicine and such. They talk about her being a school teacher, but I didn't really see much evidence of that. Did I blink at some point? I probably did. Taking those notes does distract me from the actual film sometimes. Dennis earlier had porny eyes while watching a biplane overhead. Well, now he owns one and takes her out flying. There's more bad special effects, like the scene that put Streep and Brandauer supposedly in a garden in Denmark, even though it was very clear they were shooting in a studio in London. Only this time it's more understandable to use effects. You're not going to have your two stars actually in a biplane, especially when you want to get some close-up shots while they're up amongst the birds. That would be tough logistically and probably from a safety standpoint too, although they didn't care about the lions with her that one scene, did they? They soar, and so does John Barry's music, which, by the way, as famous as it is, reminded me a lot of the main theme in Dances with Wolves. And he wrote that too, and won an Oscar for it as well. Those are very good scores, but they are pretty similar. Well, a lot of composers do repeat themselves. Danny Elfman's been accused of that. John Williams has been accused of that. Now John Barry, I'm accusing him of doing that. 2 Best Picture winners. The scene is capped with a poster shot type moment when she reaches back to him, and he reaches up to take her hand in his. And all that flying must have stirred their loins, because here they are in bed naked together. It's tasteful, but love is being made. Bror comes home and learns that they've been enjoying this torrid love affair, but all he really wants is money, not revenge, and she ponies it up immediately. He has no right to be mad at her anyway, since he stepped out long before she did, and he did give her syphilis. A nice bit of dialogue in Lüdke's screenplay is when Bror says to Dennis, "You might have asked," and the blonde man's reply is, "I did. She said yes." Of course, not everything is hunky and also dory. Things aren't going well at the farm, in fact, so she has to bring in a backer who wants to kick the natives off the land. But as she says, it's their land. She only owns it. I guess possession is only a certain part of the law, 9/10 or whatever. But this guy tells her that she has only one more year to turn a profit, or she'll default on the loan, and then her Kikiu friends will be told to find somewhere else to live, no matter if it's morally right to do that or not. And I guess she'll have to leave too. And then, he was there. She comes home to find Dennis asleep in a chair on her porch, with a drink in his hand and another classical record playing. More Mozart, I believe. The farmer sits down beside the hunter and touches his hand. Streep is, of course, a great actress, and this is a fine performance, but she sells, really sells, how much she's in love with him in this one gesture. Bror, meanwhile, asks for a divorce so he can marry some other rich woman. Dennis takes off to Uganda or something, but comes back for some lovey time and flies her to an isolated beach. She wonders if he thinks about her when he's away, but I guess not that much. He doesn't really miss her when he's gone, and he never thinks about how much she might be missing him. He refuses to get married, mostly because he's seen so many of them fail. He also admits that when he goes away, he's not only doing the great white hunter thing, sometimes he spends his time sleeping with other women. But the bottom line in his mind is that he won't love her more with a piece of paper. The old argument. Dennis wants to take Felicity out on safari, which makes Karen very mad when he brings it up. I like when she says, "Why is your freedom more important than mine?" They get into a big argument, although he protests that he doesn't love Felicity and won't fall in love with her, and she believes him, but she still wants that legal commitment. She also tries to forbid him to take the other girl out flying, which is a great way to make this guy do exactly that. So they agree that he'll have to move out of the house. Redford has almost always been likable in his movies, but it's nearly impossible to side with him here. He wants his cake, to eat it too, and then have some pie and some candy bars, and more cake. On the bright side, the coffee crop looks great after all, but then a fire wipes it all out, and even burns down the whole factory too. Man, it's one thing to have another harvest go badly, but if the building is gone too, then this coffee bean experiment is basically over. And maybe you're thinking, but what about insurance? Well, she confides to Delamere the next day that she didn't have any, because that's for pessimists. She's got the same attitude as Burt Reynolds in Deliverance. Shoot, insurance. And she can't buy more land or get anyone to back her financially, so she'll have to go back home to Denmark, if she even considers that to be home at all anymore. Probably doesn't at this point. It's been years. But she wants the new governor taking over to at least make sure the Kikiu have a place to work, because the land was theirs. We took it, and they've nowhere else to go. I've got nowhere else to go. I've got nowhere else to... The governor's wife, hearing this, is so moved that she gives her word that she'll take care of them before her husband can even say yes or no. Dennis shows up while this is going on. Even he was going to say no, wasn't he? Probably, yeah. Dennis shows up while this is going on, even watching Karen dropping to her knees to beg for the kikiu. Not that this matters as much right now, but while he wants to help, he still doesn't want what she wants out of this relationship. So off to Europe she will go to try to get more money out of her family, to at least have some kind of life back there. Karen says a sad goodbye to Farah while she prepares price tags for her belongings to be sold at a rummage sale. In walks Dennis to see Karen having dinner alone in the mostly empty house. He laments that he doesn't like being alone anymore and, wants to be with her the way she wants to be with him. He even plans to go with her when she goes to Mombasa. Since her belongings are outside in the grass with all the price tags on them, he takes her out there so they can dance amongst them. And we hear a recurring line yet again, "I had a farm in Africa." There's such a sadness in that at this point. Even more now than when the movie started, 15 hours ago? Pollack does a very clever thing, but a sad thing, when he has music playing and it's African singers, but then it abruptly stops. So we know something bad has happened. Somebody just died. It's Broer who shows up to give her the bad news that Dennis's plane crashed while he was out scouting for a future safari, and he's dead. She wonders why Broer, of all people, was sent to tell her about it, but he just thought he should. There's a big turnout for Dennis's funeral. Karen quotes an A.E. Housman poem about how he died young and left a good-looking corpse. Well, Redford was nearly 50, so fairly young. Not so young. She ends her eulogy with, "He was not ours, he was not mine," and walks off to do what Dennis probably would have done, be alone. The denouement has Streep quoting from Karen's autobiography before saying a nice goodbye to the kid who had the bum leg earlier. The snooty guys at the local club who didn't want her in there, the start of her African odyssey, now invite her in for a drink, respecting that she toughed it out for this long. Obviously she wouldn't be leaving at all if she didn't have to. And she proves to be a whiskey woman. Yay! They all share in a toast. She thanks them for this basic civility they wouldn't show her before, and she splits. And I guess all of this was real. Women have never been allowed in that club, except Karen Blixen, that one time to have that one drink. Members-only clubs are so stupid, especially when it's just an "I'm better than you" pettiness. And you don't want women in the club where there's drinking? Are you nuts? Karen heads off to the train, giving Dennis's treasured compass to Farah before she boards. I like that her parting words to him are to ask him to say her name one last time, just so she can hear his voice. Sometime later, Farah writes her a letter to say that lions often spend time hanging around Dennis's grave. I guess these lions never found out about the ones that he and Karen shot dead. Or however many other lions he probably slaughtered during all his years being there. Yeah, he was nice with that one lion. It didn't kill it when it was menacing her, but he's a killer. Look at those tusks he and his chum are carrying when we first meet him. This guy wasn't living off the land, being a vegetarian. He was an animal killer. But I kid. It's a moving ending. A graphic at the very end says that Karen published her first stories in 1934 under the nom de plume of Isaac Dinesen and never returned to Africa. Not even to visit Farah? That's cold. Or maybe she never had the money to get back, even if she desperately wanted to. I guess you could argue that failing with the coffee farm and losing a marriage and a lover did make being in Kenya as painful as it was joyful. But in any case, that's the movie. Before I go through the cast, I have to ask a rhetorical question. And you might think the answer is obvious, and you maybe wonder why I didn't bring this up earlier. But none of us can speak for others, especially millions of people, so we should really stop trying. But my question is, just how did the people of Africa feel about all the colonizing that was done by characters like these? Even when they treat the natives fairly well, as our characters do here. Sure, Karen was good to the kids, especially, and treated the other Kenyans very well, but she is trying to make profits on someone else's land. And she even acknowledges at one point it is their land. And yeah, they all make some money working for her, but look at all the stupid white gloves the houseworkers have to wear. That's a dumb thing to expect them to do in Kenya, in a hot country like that. She's not entirely about making their lives better. She needs them to keep up appearances. I just wonder how these Kikiu really felt about the Blixens. Although they did name a nearby town after her, didn't they? Karen something or other in Nairobi? In fact, if you could take a poll of all the African people who saw white men and women come into their world and take it over, would even say 20% of them be glad it happened? 10%? There's no way very many of them could have been grinning ear to ear about how these pasty people set up settlements and helped themselves to their resources. And how weird was it for all those black people to have to answer to a paleface who never seems to learn Swahili, even though they took the time to learn English. Oh, and I just called Streep a paleface, but she and Redford did get what looks like legitimately deep tans while they were shooting this movie. Even mild burns, I think. They were exposed to the sun for weeks on end, so no wonder. Anyway, let's talk about that mostly white, yet nicely tanned cast. Meryl Streep's flicks have been covered on this podcasting channel 5 times before now. The Deer Hunter, Kramer vs. Kramer, Sophie's Choice, and Adaptation, plus she's the voice of the Blue Fairy at the end of Spielberg's AI. She's also been nominated for so many awards over the years that her name has been dropped plenty in our Oscars preview shows this past decade. She was up for underwhelming and sticky work in Into the Woods, Into the Woods, Into the Woods, Florence Foster Jenkins, and Spielberg's The Post. It's weird to see more than a few years go by where she isn't nominated for an Oscar. This current drought she's in will run at least 8 years, because she hasn't been up for a trophy since The Post in 2017. Her longest drought before this was 5 years, between 1990 and 1995. In fact, while the Streeper has more nominations than any actor in history, she's also been consistent about it. Someone like, say, De Niro has been up for a lot of gold, but he's gone decades between nominations. Now, maybe she's just no longer interested in working on movies for months at a time. She is going to be 76 in a few months. But whatever the reason, Mary Louise hasn't been in any big screen films since she played the stupid idiot president in Don't Look Up. That was in 2021. It's not like she retired, though. She's done some TV things in recent years, including Only Murders in the Building, where she met her new main squeeze, Martin Short, and is also supposed to be back on the big screen at some point, doing a Devil Wears Prada sequel. Even though Pollack said many nice things about Meryl during his Oscar acceptance speech, he never directed her again. He made more films with Redford, but no more Streeps. Well, at least Meryl did work with Redford again. He directed and co-starred with her in 2007's Lions for Lambs. She, of course, puts on an impressive Danish accent in this film, which she learned by listening to tapes of the real Karen speaking. Redford, though, just sounds like Redford. He's playing a real-life Englishman, but he didn't bother trying to sound anything like the guy. Although I guess that's not true. Bob tried an accent at first, but Pollack thought it wasn't working, so he made him stop. Sort of like Costner on Robin Hood. You can't do it, and people won't buy it, so stop it. Maybe that's one reason he was passed over for a nomination for this, even though so many other people from the production were recognized, including both of his co-stars. He is mostly just John Wayne in here, though, just being himself. And didn't Redford pretty much always just John Wayne things? He didn't really have a lot of range. Great movie star, great-looking guy. Some fantastic films over the years. He could be funny and sexy and sometimes dramatic. Occasionally menacing, but not a ton of range. And he's actually top billed in this, our 7th podcast about the man's work. Pollack directed him in another beloved romantic film, The Way We Were, and he was also in Butch Cassidy, The Candidate, The Sting, and All the President's Men, plus he directed Ordinary People. He also played Roy Hobbs in The Natural, something Chris and I reviewed on our sports movie podcast, Scoring at the Movies. Bobby Reds hasn't acted very often since he started the Sundance Institute in the mid-'80s. Ever since Legal Eagles nearly 40 years ago, he had a gap of 4 years where he appeared in nothing at all, and another of 5 years. And while he wanted the mediocre The Old Man and the Gun to be his swan song, he did make a brief appearance in Avengers Endgame after that. They needed him to be in there for the time travel stuff. He'd been the corrupt guy in Captain America Civil War, but then he came back for the Assemblers, assemble, to do all that time traveling. And he hasn't directed a project in over 10 years either. So other than producing now and then and narrating the occasional project, the Double R seems to have finished his filmmaking career altogether. And hey, the guy will be 89 in August. He's done enough. Austrian actor Klaus Maria Brandauer didn't go on to have a big Hollywood career after being nominated for his work here. One of the standout titles in his resume, and it helped him get this role because Pollack liked him in it, was when he played a Bond villain in the not exactly Bond film, Never Say Never Again. As for after this motion picture experience, Klaus made things like The Russia House with Michelle Pfeiffer and his Bond buddy, Sean Connery. Plus he did White Fang with a very young Ethan Hawke. Michael Kitchen was in The Russia House along with Klaus and Connery. He was also like Brandauer in some Bond movies, but this was in the Brosnan era during the 90s, because he played Tanner in Goldeneye and The World Is Not Enough. He doesn't have a terribly challenging role here, but I found him quite likable. In some ways, he's the glue for Karen and Dennis, the Rock, until he dies. And then he can't be a glue anymore because he's not alive. Malik Bowens is Farah. He kept on being involved in African-related projects. He was in a Tarzan TV series that ran for 25 episodes in the early 90s. I don't remember that at all. And then he was a doctor in Outbreak and was Mabutu in the Will Smith movie Ali, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. Michael Goff's career went all the way back to Hammer horror films. Then he did his most famous thing ever by playing Alfred 4 times in the Burton and Schumacher Batman movies. He also worked with Burton on Sleepy Hollow and Corpse Bride when he was right at the end of his career. Susanna Hamilton was in Polanski's Tests in the late 70s and had been in 1984, the year before this. That movie should have been better than it was, considering the subject matter. It's a little boring. She's still acting to this day, although it tends to be in short films, as in, 20-minute movies. Their director, Sydney Pollack, had, for me, an up-and-down career from the standpoint of did I like his movies or not. Bev and I had major issues with Tootsie, one of them being that we thought the so-called classic comedy was only sporadically funny. Plus, he made plenty of things that I can't even remember having seen, even though my records say I did. I do remember thinking They Shoot Horses, Don't They, in the late 60s was intense when I saw it many years ago, and I liked it. Gig Young won the supporting actor Oscar for that over Jack Nicholson in Easy Rider. Pretty good movie, I think. Beyond directing Tootsie and, of course, The Way We Were, both of which have been tackled on this channel, he also acted in Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut. We reviewed that late last year, and we raved about how good he is in it. He was terrific in Tony Gilroy's Michael Clayton, and was very good in Woody Allen's Husbands and Wives, too. He's rock solid in Steve Zalian's A Civil Action as well. He's even terrific in his own movie Tootsie, where he plays Dustin Hoffman's agent. In fact, I think he was a better actor and producer than he was a director. The script was based on various books by Judith Thurman, oh man, this name, Errol Zerbinski, T-R-Z-E Binsky, and naturally, Karen Blixen herself, under her pen name, Isak Dinesen. Pollack said in his Oscar speech that he thought adapting Karen's book into a screenplay wasn't possible, but then Kurt Luedtke found a way. He only ever had 3 writing credits, and they were all for Sydney Pollack films. The other 2 were for Absence of Malice and Random Hearts. Kurt is a rarity in that he didn't produce a movie, he didn't act in one, and he never tried to be a director. Just those 3 screenplays. Now, he was a newspaperman, so I guess that was his calling. Pollack regular David Raphael worked on the script too, but he wasn't credited, although Pollack did mention his name during his speech at the Oscars, and thus he didn't win a trophy alongside Luedtke. The cinematographer David Watkins started working way back in the 60s, with one of his credits being the Beatles film Help. He did Moonstruck after this, which we've covered, and another Best Picture winner, Chariots of Fire, before it, which Chris and I covered on Scoring at the Movies. He's not to blame for this, but the DVD I got from the library was spotty and soft. But when you settle for free DVDs from your local library, this is sometimes what you have to deal with. John Barry won 5 Oscars in his career. He got 1 for the lush tunes in this picture, of course, plus 2 for Born Free. 1 was for the Born Free song itself, and the other 2 wins were for The Lion in Winter and Dances with Wolves. We've covered The Lion and The Wolves, along with things like Midnight Cowboy and Body Heat. Incidentally, Born Free was filmed in Kenya too. The man had a thing for scoring movies set there. Yet despite all that great music, he's probably best known for his old James Bond scores. While Monty Norman wrote the 007 theme, John Barry was involved with arranging the Bond stuff early on, then composed the tunes for a lot of the films, including Goldfinger, which Bev and I reviewed back in 2019. So to finally start wrapping this sucker up, I can say it's a lush, good-looking motion picture and the actors are pretty solid. Redford's odd casting, but I think Pollack went with star power and was also loyal to an old friend, rather than going for pure authenticity. Plus, Redford's always been a charisma machine, even if this role isn't close to one of his best. I mentioned Oscar nomination before, as if he was stepped over. He wasn't really worthy. Not to slag on the guy, it's not like he's bad. Even at that running time, I can't say watching this was a dull slog, although I read about how some critics said this has glacial pacing. Bev could hear me watching this while she was up in the bedroom that afternoon, and she couldn't believe how long it seemed to go on. But even though I'm the one who normally beefs about how long movies are, I'm not really with her or those critics on this one. It's a patient film and develops gradually. Maybe another day I'd be annoyed at the pace, but I wasn't this time. So I liked the movie well enough. I was whelmed. Oh, and one last thing. I'd say this has a Gone with the Wind feel to it. I didn't read anybody else talk about that, but I think it does. You've got a mentally strong woman who doesn't appear to be strong at first. Karen doesn't want to live in some big city, just like Scarlett. They both love 2 different men in the course of their stories, and they end up with neither of them. And they both have black servants, well, slaves in Gone with the Wind, who just love them. I'm sure people would scoff harder at that than I have if they watched this fresh today, by the way. In any case, maybe all those are reasons that people flocked to see this back in 1985 and into 1986, just like they flocked to see Gone with the Wind. She had a farm at Tara. She did not say that. So that was how I saw Out of Africa. I'll let you know how to contact us and also what movies we will be talking about in the next few weeks. But first, I owe you 3 delicious trivia questions. Okay, delicious is a little strong. Relatively tasty. And since we're still in Oscar month, all 3 of these will be related to the Academy Awards. So, question number 1. Has anyone named Oscar actually won an Oscar? Question number 1A. Has anyone named Academy? No, I won't do that. Question number 2. Who was the first person to win an Academy Award for acting in a Steven Spielberg film? And question number 3. Of these 3 Oscar winners, Mary Pickford, Joanne Woodward, or Elizabeth Taylor, which was the first of them to have a star dedicated to her on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? Okay, you'll get those answers in a minute or so. As of now, you might want to know what's next up on this channel. Well, next week will be March 31st, the end of Oscar month, and Bev will be back. Her foot is in good shape and she can get back to covering movies with me every Monday. So the March 31st episode will focus on a 6-time winner of gold trophies, Mad Max Fury Road. All right, I hope you'll rate and review our show on your podcast app. Subscribe too. Also look for us on YouTube. All our shows go up on the tube. It's at HYES Ellis in the search bar. Comment, like, and subscribe. To let us know what you think about Out of Africa or other podcasts that we have covered, fire off an email. We're haveyouvrseenpodcast@gmail.com. Or take the social media route and find us on Blue Sky or Twix. On the Sky, I'm Ryan-Ellis, and Bev is Bev Ellis Ellis. On Elon's thing, we're at MovieFiend51 and at Bev Ellis Ellis. And while we talked about African coffee today, make your day so much better by going with a Canadian brand and go to the Sparkplug Coffee website. Anyone who's never used the promo code of HYES before can take advantage of a 20% discount. So it's sparkplug.coffee/HYES. All right, let's unveil the answers to those trivia questions that are Oscar related. Number 1, has anyone named Oscar actually won an Oscar? Yes, Oscar Hammerstein won 2 trophies way back in the 40s for writing the best song of the year in Lady Be Good and State Fair. Question number 2, who was the first person to win an Academy Award for acting in a Steven Spielberg film? So all those years of technical awards and score for John Williams and this and that, but nobody won an Oscar until Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln in 2012, which was about 40 years into Steve's directing career. Mark Rylance and Ariana DeBose have won trophies since. And question number 3, of these 3 Oscar winners, Mary Pickford, Joanne Woodward, or Elizabeth Taylor, which was the first of them to have a star dedicated to her on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? It seems unlikely, and with respect to a great actress, Joanne Woodward would be the answer. And that's going to wrap up the one about Meryl and Bob's African Lion Safari. Thanks for your time. That was a little reference to local people, that commercial jingle I just somewhat sang. Join us next week when our swan song in this year's Oscar month will be about Mad Max Fury Road. Meantime, I'm going to sit here for a bit and pine for Robert Redford. Or really, I'll let Bev do that. She's always had a massive crush on that guy. My crush on him is normal-sized. And cut.